Zoomin is the producer of a powerful content delivery platform that allows you to bring together content of all types, structured, unstructured, audio, video, and other content types in one modern online knowledge center, improving the overall experience you provide to prospects and customers alike. If you'd like to learn more about Zoomin software, point your browser to zoominsoftware.com. So good morning and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Paul Parada, your host for this episode, featuring our guest expert, Kat Reierson, Senior Technical Writer at Docusign. Kat,
Hello.
say hello.
Hello, hello.
Where are you calling from?
I am in Minnesota.
Minnesota. Is it cold? Is it hot?
Oh, I think it's hot, but I prefer the winter, which is why I'm up here. So,
Okay, I'm calling from San Diego, and we're currently socked in with fog, so it's a nice cool day so far. In a couple hours, I'm sure it'll be bright sunshine, but that's where we are. Before we continue the show, let me tell our audience a few things. Today's show is being recorded, and that means you can access it using the same URL you're using today. We cannot see or hear you. You can ask a question, but we can't answer back. And that means you can just type a question in the question tab of the webinar viewing panel. You can also access additional content like troubleshooting or content from our guest and from our sponsor, Zoomin Software. All right. So let's start with a little information about you, Kat. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do for a living, and let us know how you found your way to technical documentation.
sure. So, I am, like you said, a senior technical writer at Docusign. I've been a technical writer in some form or fashion for about 8 years now, which translates into just a little bit of time spent working with subject matter experts, which is what we're here to talk about today. But I actually started out in marketing after I graduated. It didn't take long before I realized that it was not for me. Something about communication with the intent to sell rather than inform, I think it just kind of kept me awake at night.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But after I had graduated with a minor in technical writing, I knew I wanted to stay in communications. So I went back to school, started working on my master's in tech writing, and was lucky enough to find a company willing to take a chance on a young writer.
Awesome. I think a lot of us come to the profession that way, where we either want to try out from with almost no experience or very little experience, but there's also a large number of people who come from other professions, and
Definitely.
marketing is one of the sources of those. It's sort of a natural in a lot of ways because communication is communication, but you're right, the intent is different. One is about helping prospects become customers, and the other is about informing people. And I think that's an important distinction, but there's a lot of similarity as well.
Definitely.
So let's jump right to the topics, the topic of today's show. What do you mean by subject matter expert?
Yeah, and obviously, people can Google this. There's a lot of definitions out there, but I kind of like to think of a subject matter expert as anyone who knows something I don't. It could be a product manager responsible for prioritizing product features, or even my mom, who I still call when I forget how to make her rice mashed potatoes during Christmas. And I tend to shy away from the emphasis on a person needing to be the best or having 10 years of experience doing something in order for them to be considered a subject matter expert. A subject matter expert is just someone who knows something you don't.
I think that's a good distinction to make, actually. I hadn't considered it quite in those terms, but that makes more sense. Um, when you go to work, of course, you don't get to pick your coworkers, and you certainly, as a writer, you don't get to pick the teams that you work with when you're working with people outside your organization. And they may be designated your subject matter experts, but whether they're experts or not is debatable at best. A lot of times they are, though, and if they have 20 years experience with the company, that's a really nice resource because they can tell you why things happen as well as what is happening.
Definitely.
Well, so what are some typical challenges facing information developers who are attempting to work with subject matter experts?
Yep. So I could probably easily spend an entire morning coming up with challenges folks can encounter when attempting to work with a subject matter expert. But I've got kind of two in mind that tend to frustrate people, or you kind of aren't as obvious. So first one, they know everything. It's generally how they get the title of a subject matter expert, right? Like they know it all. That's incredibly cool. But this can really backfire on those of us trying to work with them in spectacular fashion. On one hand, you've got the know-it-all who doesn't understand why they need to spend time answering your questions, because obviously you should just know it all too, right? And if you find yourself here, you probably didn't do a good job in providing context ahead of time. And on the other hand, you have the person that knows everything and thinks you need to know everything,
Yes.
and then they proceed to tell you everything.
Right.
And if I adopted a cat for every time I should have redirected a conversation with a SME and I didn't, I'd have a house full of cats. Learn how to redirect an oversharing SME that knows everything, and you'll save yourself and them a lot of time.
One of the things that I think I always found as a writer, or often found, was that I would have to ask a lot of questions and figure out what wasn't necessary. What did I need to tell users of this particular product or service or piece of software or screen? I had to pick out what was important, but I needed to know why the subject matter expert told me that it was important.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not. It just is for your information, and they think I'm going to be interested in that. But a lot of times there's a reason for that. And in the places where I've really messed up, and there's thousands of those examples, it has been because I disregarded something that was coming from a subject matter expert, only to have it bite me later. And
Yes.
I wonder if you've ever had any kind of experience like that.
Oh, of course. Sometimes, a big part of it is just communication. And if you ever get to one of those points where you don't know why they told you something, it's okay to ask more questions.
Yes.
Ask them to say, hey, okay, is this page limit, why is that important? And then maybe they'll be like, yeah, if you hit that page limit, they're not going to get any more reporting results. They're going to stop, and then they're not going to see everything. So it's okay. Ask questions,
That's kind of nice. It doesn't have to be formal, right? It's a conversation, and you're probably going to have that conversation a few times.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, experts say that the key to success in almost anything is preparation. So what ideas do you have for preparing for an SME meeting?
Well,
you say SME, don't you?
I do say SME, subject matter expert, if anyone out there.
I'll try to adopt
No,
that.
no, you're good.
All my peers do too, and I've never adopted it. I'll try and say SME. It sounds like something from Dr. Seuss. So the smooths and the SMEs.
So whatever experts out there are saying this, I couldn't really agree more, because preparation is really absolutely key here. There's a ton of things that you can do to prepare for a SME, and honestly, you're really setting yourself up for success if you take the time to prepare. You can educate yourself. I try never to walk into a meeting with a SME without doing your own research on not only the topic you're asking them about, but also on the SME. Understand their role, get up to speed on jargon they might use. They're not around to teach you everything. So being able to go into a meeting with a SME ahead of time with some basic knowledge shows them that you're not wasting their time and that you respect it, and you took the time to do some research. So that's one thing you can do. Then obviously communication, that's a huge one. Communicate them with before you go and talk to them. Tell them who you are, because while I tell you to prepare, they might not. So prepare for them. Tell them who you are, why you're reaching out to them, what you want to talk about, and what you're going to do with the information. Seriously, if you don't do this, you might end up talking to someone who is a SME, but they might not be the SME that has the information you need. So if you communicate ahead of time what you're looking for, you're more likely to get the right SME, the right person, and then, be good at grabbing your information from them.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one, and this is probably one of my favorites that a lot of people, I haven't really seen this anywhere when folks are talking about how to work with SMEs, is go into it with an open mind. Unless you already have a strong working relationship with this SME, it's likely that you have a lot to learn about their work style or their communication preferences. It takes time to build those relationships, and it takes time to become confident in your own ability and approach to working with SMEs. Still to this day, after 8 years doing this, I encounter plenty of SMEs that make me think twice about the way I approach knowledge transfer meetings, and this is not going to happen. I'm going to be learning for the rest of my life, and that's okay.
I always found that really daunting and intimidating to some degree when I had to approach someone, especially when I was very new, someone who was very senior. And being able to go and say, here's what I know, and here's what I'm looking for from you, often kind of frames it so that you don't get the history of programming instead of just saying, here's what this snippet of code does. Or I don't need to know the history of power supplies when all I'm going to do is say, connect this. And it only works in North America and mostly in the US, right?
Yep.
It's those kinds of things SMEs don't tend to pay attention to because for them, it's a larger topic. But once you can narrow it, you can tell people, here's what I'm doing and I need your help. I think that goes a long way, but you're never sure. I've certainly had people who told me, you're not the right person to work with me.
Yes, yep, and that happens, and that's okay too.
Do you, when you're talking with them, do you talk about how the process is going to work and the schedule that you're going to be on?
Yeah, that can really be smart, because it helps if, you need a sense of urgency, like, hey, I got this task on Monday and I need to finish it by Friday. If you let them know ahead of time that you are working on a schedule, generally, most SMEs I've worked with try to help. So the more information you give them, they're going to work with you. That's their job. They know that they're the expert at something.
One of the things that I found is that a lot of people now are using automated systems, workflow systems that will say, I'm in this stage, I'm writing this, and I send it to the SME. See, I used it. I send it to the SME for review, and the person has to review it in the tool that the company uses.
Yes.
And often it's really hard to get someone to use a tool that they're not comfortable using. And it might be standard email type thing in the terms of text manipulation and all, but sometimes it's not. And, you can find engineers who just have been disregarding those mails or those notifications, whether it's a mail or not, I don't know, but those notifications, and they just don't follow your schedule. And suddenly you're behind schedule. You can't make your own milestones because the SME didn't participate in the scheduled part of your task. And I find that's, telling them, here's what's going to happen. You're next. And you'll get an email from me and it will have this in the header. This is what I'm looking for. That sort of thing kind of helps to understand, here's how we're going to communicate, as opposed to, I'm going to meet you in real time at your office maybe, and we're going to talk about this until I'm satisfied and can leave, right?
Yeah, and that's gotten increasingly difficult with today's age, right? Because a lot of us are still working from home. You can't just go and bug your SME and be like, hey, just a reminder, I need this on Friday, before Friday, so that I can get it done on Friday. But just like you said, being able to prepare them and prep them ahead of time. And sometimes, if you ask them ahead of time, like, hey, are you comfortable doing this? Will you do this? Or if they've been a repeat offender in the past where they won't, sometimes it is necessary to change it up. They might feel so uncomfortable and nervous by that tool that you're asking them to review in.
Yeah.
Maybe if you send it to them in a Google Doc, or, I mean, oh goodness, even if you snail mail them a PDF copy, you might actually get your results faster. And sometimes that's just what you have to do. I don't like forcing people to do something they'd hate. It doesn't make for a good working relationship.
Yeah, you can. There's pros and cons, certainly, and a lot of people don't like doing what they're not comfortable doing. So, yeah. Well, can you share with us some of your ideas for capturing what SMEs have shared during knowledge transfer sessions?
Notes are your best friend. If you can balance taking notes, while also ensuring that your SME feels like you're paying attention to them, you're set for success. Be it handwritten notes in your own personal scribbles, your shorthand, whatever, or if you can type lightning fast and keep up with them, take your notes. But even better and less reliant on your ability to multitask, because I know that sometimes I'm not very good at that, record your knowledge transfer session. Spend the time you have with them soaking up what they tell you. Be an active listener. Be in the moment and ask questions that come to mind. You can play back that recording as much as you like after the meeting without sacrificing your relationship with your SME or losing vital information they share because you can't type or write fast enough.
Or you didn't think to write that part down.
Or you didn't think to, because sometimes we're biased, we think, hey, that doesn't sound important. I don't need to write that down. Well, that's when, like you said, that's going to come and bite you in the butt.
So we have a couple of comments from the audience, and I'll throw them in here. One says, I found that setting an automatic reminder within the email request is helpful. So you can do that. Mm-hmm.
Ooh, I have never done that. I've never done that before. That's awesome.
I never did that either. Yeah. And the second is, how do you deal with a resistant SME, someone who won't cooperate with your timelines and getting your feedback when you need approvals on content?
Well, the marketer in me wants to send them a Caribou gift card or butter them up per se in a little way, make them show. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to monetize things to get them to show. Really, what people, a good motivator is showing them that their input is valued and that, hey, you are actually helpful for this. Don't make it negative. Negative reinforcement with SMEs does not work. Don't get mad at them. Don't tell them they're a bad person for not getting back to you. I mean, last case scenario, I escalate to a manager and just say, hey, do you have ideas for working with this person? I'm not getting it. But honestly, if you just tell them that you value their time and that their impact and their knowledge is useful, that you're much more likely to get a good response from a SME, and hopefully they value what they're working on.
Hopefully. I'm thinking of some people I've worked with in the past, and I think, wow, you just need a small army and a way to cut off electricity. So there are, but I take your point. I have used Bribery in the past, as simple as logo pencils or logo pens. Something that you can go get from your marketing organizations have swag all over the place.
Yeah.
They pay for it, they never use it, or they use it, but they don't use it up. And if you give someone 2 pens, they will think that you thought more of them, and they will do work that they wouldn't have done.
Yep.
We also used to provide pizza reviews where we will provide lunch if you show up and work with us in real time.
Ooh.
So you're further along, you're not doing the initial information request, you're really, massaging content, putting it in the right order, trying to figure out what the best thing is. Pizza reviews, when we worked in person, were amazing what people will do for free food.
And there's something to be said, just like you're saying, we're not in the office as much anymore. People value snail mail. Honestly, I've gotten just a little happy birthday card from one of my lovely coworkers who remembers birthdays and takes the time to send a letter. That actually goes a really long way. So there's many, many ways to just let them know you care, you thought about them, you appreciate their time. That's the key.
I think that's kind of fun, actually, too, because it's fun to come up with new ideas.
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit. When you're going through working with a SME, what role does shared terminology and communications preferences play in successfully working with that person? So, and tell me what you mean by terminology, because everybody has a different take on that. And I'm talking about applications. We know what terminology means, but there's applications that are different. So, what role does a shared terminology have?
Sure. So, shared terminology, kind of jargon, right, is just terminology you encounter in a specific situation or industry. It can be a phrase or a term, but to specific groups of people, it has meaning that outside of that group, others maybe don't understand, or it might mean something completely different. So, let's take script. To medical professionals, it means a prescription. But if you take that word script and ask an actor, it's a document that tells them about the settings, characters, and dialogue for a movie or a stage play. So, really, knowing that there are words, terminology, jargon out there that can have multiple meanings, and remembering this when you're working with your SME, it really empowers you to communicate in a fashion that helps you connect with your SME. It's the same idea as identifying your audience. If you're writing for a rocket scientist, the words you're going to use are very different from if you were, say, writing for a kindergarten class, right? You want your SME to understand your questions and then also let them know that you're understanding what they're telling you.
Mm-hmm.
And we do that through shared terminology.
I think there's another aspect to that too, and that is that terminology, there's general industry terminology, and then there's terminology we use inside a company. So there might be document portfolios as the industry term, but your company says we just call it a folio,
Mm-hmm.
or we call this your virtual folder, or there's some aspect to that, and SMEs don't know typically about that. That's my sense, and we often I have been more successful in the past when I tell them I'm going to translate into our company's use of the terms.
Hey,
So it's important that I understand what you mean when we go forward, because I'm going to be doing the translating, and I'll show you when I do it. But there's a big difference, because you don't want to use your main competitor's terminology. That looks like you're your main competitor, and that's your marketing people you'll get bugs open, trust me, against your documentation. So you kind of have to. You also have to know that one of your roles is to translate into company terminology and approved terms that your typically your marketing communications department are using. So here's the real name of the product. We call it this, but the real name is X, and it has a long name and a TM next to it, or a registered trademark symbol. And those things matter to us because we are beholden to a different set of standards than perhaps a SME might be held to. They're held to different standards, but not those.
It can even have a legal repercussion too, right? So if you're misusing the way, right? So trademarks and those things, we're even more important than just a style guide. You can lose your legal rights to something.
Correct. Correct. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to be the reason why your company no longer has the IP. So intellectual property. So how do we go about creating a shared terminology, and how do we develop an understanding of those communication preferences?
I can't say I've ever proactively thought about creating a shared terminology before. It's always kind of been something for me that kind of happens organically when I start a new position or project. I tend to absorb the words and phrases used around me. But there's definitely an importance to respecting communication preferences. Just like you were saying, if a coworker lets me know that PM here stands for product manager and not project manager, that's something that I need to remember that, because if you misuse terminology or jargon in a professional setting, it really hampers not only your representation of the company through your writing, but it also hampers people's respect for you and your work. So it's important.
I think there's also an area in there where you have to understand your company's view of how development happens. So if you have say a very simple version would be, you have nothing, you have a prototype, or you have a design, then you build a prototype, then you model it and test it, and then you make the final, and then you ship it. That's almost never what it's called. You often have a different set of milestones to talk about. Developers have their own milestones internally. Some of those are external to their organizations, and you have to be aware of them because that's what they talk about in schedules and things like that.
Yep.
But aligning to what the important ones are for your SME and for you, it seems to me like we don't spend a lot of time on that. And as we're not in the office together anymore, it's a little harder to just guess that everyone knows the same thing.
Yeah, you're not picking it up the office chatter anymore. There's no more sitting around the water cooler and going, wait a minute, what does DAC mean to you? Because that's not what it meant to me. So yeah, we're kind of missing some of that. I hadn't thought about that.
Or when you think about something like, hey, when will the prototype be ready? And that's not what they call it. So if you're, I'll date myself from many years ago at IBM. If you're not at M30 and you're only at T20, did you mess something up? And those are named milestones, and there's a list of deliverables for each of those milestones. And there's a list of responsibilities for every group on the product team. Here's what we're expecting to see. And if you're not ready, you don't meet the milestone date. If you don't meet the date, the project manager and possibly the product manager will have a discussion with you about how come you can't actually use a calendar. So there's a lot of things that people use, I think, not as, they don't use it as, it is jargon, but it's specific to the company, not the product or not the field. And there's that aspect of it that I think we have to really worry about, because as we are not co-located anymore, it makes it feel more disjointed.
Yeah.
So
you're not presenting a good, consistent example or, writing to your users either. If folks are not learning those things organically, that's tough.
Or you find that you are documenting something that you've missed the boat on what the point of this piece of documentation is. You want to know that at a certain period or a certain milestone, that's set in stone. You're not going back to fix that. And I think a good product manager and a good project manager will have been following along and won't let you wait until the week before release to say, oh, that intro, it's all wrong.
Yeah.
That can't happen. I refuse to allow that in my own work.
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to leave this webinar and be able to use project and product manager correctly anymore now.
Well, and just to throw a little bit more into the mix, some teams use product manager and project manager. Some are interchangeable, and some change the meanings. What I think of as a product manager, I'm responsible for getting this product out the door, is called a project manager at some companies, and vice versa.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. So we talked a little bit about recording things, and I never got a chance to do that when I was working as a writer. I've worked as a writer and in many other roles. So when I was working as a writer, I didn't get to record because we weren't doing it on Zoom or whatever your conferencing software was. Yep. And I didn't have a little device I could carry with me and say, hey, do you mind if I record you? Because nobody was going to do that. Everybody kind of expects that your Zoom meeting is going to be recorded or could possibly be recorded. So what can we learn from that? I mean, what do you get out of that other than you get a recording at the end of it?
Yeah. So I love recording knowledge transfer meetings. If I am talking to anyone, it could even just be a normal meeting, I try and record them. If I'm interviewing someone, though, I want to be able to, I said this already, but I really want to be in the moment and absorb what they're saying, because generally, if I'm actively listening, I find I have these follow-up questions that keep popping into my head. Whereas if I'm busy using my thinking abilities to write notes while they're speaking, I'm too busy keeping up. The biggest takeaway about recording meetings, though, is that you're less likely to waste your SME's time having them to ask a question again because you missed their answer the first time.
Yeah.
So record your meetings. Nowadays, it's lovely, and again, a little easier now with things being remote. But you can use Zoom, Google Meet, or even your phone when you're meeting a SME in person.
Yeah.
But I want to caution people, and I always try and do this when I talk about recordings. Don't forget to ask them if it's okay at first, and be very clear about when you're recording. That's just basic respect and communication right there. Yeah. But here's another one that bites me in the butt. Those recordings that you get, download them. Because if you don't download them, I've lost so many recordings of knowledge transfer meetings because I didn't download them after I had the recording because it had an expiration date, which meant I couldn't access it later. And then I'm going, I spent this whole time telling this poor SME that I was recording this, and I didn't take notes because I recorded it and then I lost it. Yeah. So it's not just about recording it. You also have to make sure you save the recording.
There's something I think we're all learning about. Just because you have something in the cloud doesn't mean you always have that something in the cloud.
No.
And a lot of times, companies have timers or expiration dates on content because they can't keep it around, right? I mean, it's just
data privacy issues, right? Like, you can't keep it around. The storage is expensive and data is sensitive.
One of the things that you can also that's really interesting when you're attempting to do a recording is that some people will be very, very formal when they're being recorded. And they're far less formal when they're not. So sometimes you have to say, especially if you know someone, you're not at the very beginning or something, you can say, just signal if you don't want this to be recorded, because often you can get information about working with other team members that no one wants to go on record saying.
Definitely.
And that is often more valuable than anything else. That person only works from 3 p.m. until 11 because they're trying to get stuff done.
And they might not want to get them in trouble.
Correct. You can get them in trouble because the core hours for the company are 10 to 3. And, it's those kinds of things, and knowing that they exist is, in my opinion, what helps you be a better coworker and a better colleague. Maybe not a better writer, but understanding that people have motivations for things is key to what you do.
Right? Have you found that there's a signal that works for you? I've never thought of that before. So I'm curious if you have any, raise your hand, or is it a verbal thing?
After you've been talking to someone for a while, if they're going to say something that might be controversial, their eyes shift around a little bit and they do the and you can figure out and you say, hey, why don't we stop the recording for a bit? And why don't we talk about, that's not important for what we're doing. I just want to hear some background and I don't need to record that. People open up a great deal.
Body language. Got it.
It's kind of fun. Are there opportunities to help SMEs become better translation?
Oh, it looks like we maybe lost Paul here for a moment. Technology, right? So I think, there we go.
I went away, I'm back.
Oh, okay. So you were asking about opportunities to help SMEs be better
translation assistants from the super technical to something that users need to learn. So Are there opportunities to do that?
Yes. Yep. So this is basically one of those train the trainer opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Your SME isn't going to expect you to instantly understand and know everything they do. And you shouldn't expect them to be able to explain things to multiple audiences in multiple ways. That's my job. If every engineer I knew was also an amazing communicator and great at creating user-friendly documentation, I'd be out of a job. So I'm okay with this personally, but you can definitely kind of help them a little bit. One of the ways that I've been successful in helping SMEs become better explainers is making sure they understand how their knowledge actually impacts the business. This kind of goes back to the, making sure they feel valued. How does what they know impact customers or their teammates' work? If you can help them understand that what they know is valuable, and I mean this like beyond just the reason that it gets them a paycheck and pays the bills, right?
Mhm.
It's likely to help them realize the value in assisting you, that spending the time to make sure you understand them and have the information that you need is valuable.
Yep.
And who doesn't love feeling valued, right? It's not obvious to everyone that maybe they know something more valuable than they assume, or that others are interested in what they know.
I agree, actually. I think that that's an unspoken assumption by many people. And it's not necessarily true that everyone has the same expectation. And understanding that you value someone and that you say so are two different things. And it does matter, even with the crankiest of SMEs. Now, they might throw it back in your face and say, I don't need you to value me. I need you to stop wasting my time.
Yep.
But at least you're having a conversation.
You're trying. All you can do is try.
Well, what strategies are there for communicating with SMEs that might help improve the chances of success?
Sure. So we've already really talked a lot about preparing quite a bit, but there's one thing that it's kind of sticks out in my mind that I can't recommend enough, and that's to simply ask the SME. Use communication as a strategy for improving your chances of success. Ask them if they prefer to meet over Zoom or in person, if that's possible. Ask them if they want a list of questions ahead of time. Some people like that, some people don't.
Mhm.
Ask them if they have a preference, if you call or direct message or email them with follow-up questions. I don't want people to call me. Please do not call me. Text me, email me, Slack me, anything but call me, because whatever I'm doing in that moment, you're going to distract me.
Right.
So, and hopefully, if they feel strongly about any of this, they'll tell you. And then if you follow through on those preferences of theirs, that's going to put you in their good graces and increase your chances of being successful with that working relationship.
People often remember when other people were helpful in that way. I'm a person who doesn't want to be called because often I'm in meetings all day, right?
Yeah.
So for me to get a text message is far simpler for me because I can surreptitiously answer, especially if I'm on a meeting and I'm not talking while still looking like I'm being part of the meeting. I don't recommend that if you're in a senior meeting and people are watching you. You have to like
if you have C-level and directors, maybe pay attention.
They do notice and they do mention it to one another. Information hard won, I think.
Oh my goodness.
So do you know of any resources like blogs or websites or maybe some tools that our viewers could find useful as they move forward in adopting a content-first design approach?
Yeah, so there's so many resources out there. This is a topic that I like to speak to because it resonates with me, not because I'm the first person to think of this. There's books and blogs and articles and even courses that people teach to help us become better with these types of working relationships. I did go ahead and put together like just a small list of kind of some things that resonated with me. So anyone who's around here watching this or the recording, there should be a way for you to download that list from the attachment section.
Yes.
However, you're kind of viewing this chat of ours. But if you can, even if you just go to Google or Bing or whatever search results you like, and you can search on working with SMEs. And there's so much out there, and even better, you can kind of narrow your search by your industry, right? So working with SMEs is not specific to technical writing. And we talked about a couple of challenges or specific scenarios that might be frustrating, but you can really dial in like, hey, this SME thinks I'm wasting their time. How do I do this? It's out there. Trust me. Someone else has dealt with this. Maybe you're
members of your own team.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's even great. Don't just rely on the internet. The internet's not always right. Trust me.
Right.
But sometimes your team, that's actually a really good point. Your team is one of the greatest assets you can tap because especially if they've been around longer than you, they might know that person and they might have already done that trial and error. Hey, I tried emailing this person and they do not respond. You have to call them.
Yeah.
So if you hate it, you just need to call them. Or this person, like you said, maybe hates that internal tool that we have for editing. And I've found that if I send them a Google Doc, you will get your answers. So that's so great. Yeah. Utilize the team you have around you.
Mm-hmm. There's often a lot of history, and more senior members of your team probably have dealt with that department or this person or both before. And it won't be directly applicable because it was in the past and there might have been a different development process or a different set of, new sheriffs in town kind of thing. But often there are reasons why people, are difficult or don't answer their stuff or are distracted. And knowing about that, so someone's maybe going through a divorce or has had a death in the family or has had someone sick in their family. Knowing that is really helpful because you can say, you know what, I can wait. I don't need this. What would be a better time? Do you think next Monday instead of this week would be okay? You might have to juggle your own milestones, but the answers you're going to get from a person who's distracted like that are not the ones you want anyway.
Yeah. If they're coming back from maternity leave for whatever reason it is, they've got an inbox that is probably drowning in things that they need to look at. So being respectful of their schedule and their time, that's a great point. Take into consideration what's going on in their life. And to add to that, sometimes I have found that those folks who are especially, let's just say, not helpful as a SME, they probably had a bad experience with someone who came to them before. Because, I know I probably pissed off so many people when I was starting out. I would go to a meeting and I'd be like, I need this information. And they're like, you didn't tell me who you are. You didn't tell me why. And now I have to sit here with you. So, remember that maybe they have had bad experiences and maybe have a little PTSD and don't want to do that again.
Actually, it's pretty true. It's kind of a hallmark of my career. So, well, let's see. We have a few questions from audiences, and so let's dive into some of those from the audience members. I meant, what tactics have you used successfully to get cooperation from a SME who responds with, "It's already written down, and why do you need my time?" Paraphrased, of course, but that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, this could be on you and it could be on them, right? So going back to preparing yourself, make sure you read up before you go in. But sometimes if someone says something like that and you didn't know there was, you can ask them to share it with you. Hey, how do I get to it? So I can let them know that you are willing to put the time in to go read those things and say, hey, if you share those with me, I would happily read them. And then do you mind if I come back with questions then? Right. Let them know that you're willing to work with them, that you don't want to waste their time. No one wants their time wasted. So even if it's maybe something you've already read, don't get confrontational. Don't tell them that you read it already. Just have them share it with you, read it again and say, hey, thank you for sharing that. Now I have some more follow-up questions and hopefully they'll be a little more receptive to that.
I think that's pretty good, actually. How do you navigate a situation in which a piece of content that we produce in technical content needs to be reviewed by multiple SMEs?
You're getting there.
I'm
how it needs to be. So when you're kind of talking about SMEs, and especially if there's a lot of them, you can kind of in your mind, like, think about who knows the most and who's the busiest. This goes back to like social schedules or life things too. Hey, maybe X, Y, and Z are available right now, whereas A, B, and C are really busy with another project. So maybe have the folks who are available check it out first and then go to the next one so that you've already made some improvements. Another way to think about it is, this goes back to the SMEs that know it all. Maybe save your know it all, the one who's the best expert, for very last. Have the most information you can possibly before going to that C-level, director level, manager, very busy know it all person. So because if you can try and utilize folks who maybe aren't as busy first, or maybe have enough information first. Then again, you're showing that really, really important SME or busy SME that you value their time and you tried to put some work in before getting to them. Because if that's me who's been around for 10 years is going through and adding commas and correcting acronyms, that's not going to feel good to them when someone else could have been doing it for them.
And I would remind people that you probably should do that ahead of time. What you're presenting is, I propose to publish this as is. And that means you've done, I realize not all organizations do it this way, but if it's poorly edited and does not conform to your own style guide and you're going to have to make the changes, don't present that to a SME.
They get hung up on it.
Correct. Present what you plan to publish. And even if that means you have to put extra work in it, I believe that if you go and change it because your style guide or your department practice requires that you do so, but you showed them a different version, the review comments are not valid.
They're going to be saving.
I think you have to go back and re-review. So who wants to do that?
Yep.
Another question, an issue my team seems to have is that SMEs gives short, terse answers. Or sometimes they don't fully answer our questions in emails, which is, by the way, a hallmark of SMEs.
Yep.
Have you ever experienced this, and do you have any suggestions?
All the time. Email is hard, right? Written communication is hard. It's like texting. I find it incredibly difficult to fully explain the depth of my questions, or that I want them to elaborate. I almost wonder if there's a reason, is there a reason why you can't talk with them? Even 15 minutes. So they might not want to sit for an hour and chat with you, but if you can, even if you have a question that you think you can get through email, schedule just 10, 15 minutes with them. Make it short and sweet. Ask them that way. Email is so hard. So hard.
I think email is hard for a lot of reasons. And if someone doesn't answer your emails or doesn't answer all the questions in it, you have to ask yourself, how did you present those questions? So what I find is, even though I don't want to write this way, I put them in bullets or I number them. So I can go back and say, yeah, you answered 1, 2, 7, and 10, but you didn't answer 3, 8, and I still need those answers. That's much easier than having someone go through and say, oh, I skipped over it because you wrote a 4,500 word paragraph and I didn't catch it all because my eyes glazed over,
Yeah, and to add on to that, one of the beautiful things with that in email is you can make it easy for them. Hey, just go ahead down to my bullet points and just answer in a different color right there. And it helps them stay on track. So using those bullet points and then making it easy so they don't have to copy paste things, make it easy for them. That's a good idea. Yep, bullet points.
Another thing that I do, so in my career, I've also had to work with directors, senior directors, executives at whatever organization. And one of the things I know is that if you write a long email, nobody will read it, and they will find someone on their staff to contact you to say, please stop sending me emails. And executives are trained differently. Most people don't realize that they go through extra training. You don't just show up one day and, hey, I'm a senior director. They go through training. Certainly vice presidents go through training, and they're often going through coaching. One of the things they do is that they don't put things in writing because that's discoverable legally and they are personally responsible. So you're not going to get answers to things from high-level people. You need short, quick questions. If you ever read what VPs write to one another, it's horrific. They're not nice. They are not friendly. It's very much to the point. And they don't know how to write to people who don't have that. That's one of the reasons why they don't. They'll send it to someone else and say, can you handle this? It's really a different kind of communication.
I feel like that could be a great comic, almost like
Yeah.
Dilbert, just like the sea
That's why
level,
Dilbert's so funny.
that back and forth communication. I would love to see that. I really would. I can't say that I have any experience with it myself.
Well, here's someone writes, for reviews, I provide a PDF link on a shared site and ask the SME to review and comment on the content as they can fit it in based on a deadline. They can they can all see the comments, so they even comment on those comments. This is with multiple SMEs, I believe.
I love that.
Or provide additional information to gain more details and make the content more robust. You actually have to do stuff like that. If you have more than one SME, yeah.
Have you ever seen SMEs start to fight about an answer in the comments? Oh, I love it. Okay, this is terrible, but it provides a lot of entertainment when I'm in my work. But it's actually really good because so there's this idea, right, in psychology that you are more likely to get a right answer if you provide a wrong answer first. People don't care if you have it right. They won't comment. They're cool. All right, yeah, it looks good. If you write something wrong, though, people will chime in. Yeah. I think one example that I love that I heard of is someone was like, if I ever need advice on something, I'll go online, I'll type out what I'm looking for answer, sign into a different account, give myself a bad answer, and then that all of a sudden gets all of the internet to chime in on that. So having those comments visible is huge, and it lets them also, it's a way for them to learn more too. Like, you might have a young engineer come in and go, hey, this is this, and then the rest of the team will realize they need to help that person better understand that feature or something,
or that they themselves don't understand it, which is okay. But it does happen. SMEs are not universally SME, Here's a slightly different question. It's been waiting here for a while, and I wanted to put that in. I started as a technical writer at the beginning of the pandemic, and I've never actually met our development team in person. When working remotely, how do you foster those relationships with SMEs?
I have never met anyone at Docusign in person, and I've been there for about 2 years now.
Yeah.
Also, during the pandemic, I do have a little more experience, though. I knew that I wanted to work from home way before the pandemic, so this is kind of my natural environment. So how do you do that? Well, it kind of goes back to the communication ahead of time, right? Figure out their preferences, start to build, that repertoire with them, ahead of time, like, hey, do you prefer if I Slack you? Because I've definitely got SMEs that will only answer Slacks, and I've got SMEs that will only talk in person. So kind of asking questions ahead of time. You can even introduce yourself. A really big thing that we're working on right now is like onboarding and learning how to introduce yourself to folks before you need something. Because when you go to someone and you need something, right, that's a different environment. Yeah. So if you can go to someone and introduce yourself, so like the team, just pop into one of their Scrum meetings, pop into sprint planning, whatever you can do to just say, hi, hello, I'm new, this is what I'm doing, before you need something. It gives them context and kind of starts that relationship building process.
Right. The first time you meet someone and you say, by the way, I need all your comments by tomorrow, is probably not the best way to meet.
They're not going to like that. But it's definitely difficult. It's hard in this day and age with the pandemic and in digital. It's not as easy. It's not as intuitive.
It's also the case that you can go around and introduce yourself to the members. You take 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Don't ask for anything more. Just say, hey, I want to introduce myself and just let you know who I am. Here's my role. Here's what I'll be working on. I understand you know all this, and I want to work with you. I think that that's a good way to say, I'm here, without asking for something first. When you do go to ask for something, I think you have to be knowledgeable that what you're asking for is reasonable, and you have to know that they think it's reasonable. So sometimes people don't know their own jobs. There's a lot of people who don't believe that they have to answer questions from technical writers.
Yep.
And, it's okay to bring in big guns.
Yep.
My manager talked to your manager and, hey, how come you told on me? Like, well, you didn't want to work with me. So I'm really blunt when it comes to that.
And just really quick, because I know we're getting close to the end of time that we've got today. I could go on. I love this. This is great. But also make sure sometimes it's helpful if you offer what you can help them with.
Yes. Yeah.
Make it
I
a
know
fair
where this
trade.
information is. I can show you what other things are. Have you ever seen our library?
Yeah. Yep.
A lot
Provide
of people,
something to them. It's not just about you
don't
needing.
know. Yeah, they don't know that it's available, and
Yep.
like, oh yeah, I know where to go look. Let me get a couple more questions.
Anything interesting?
There's lots. I'm trying to decide among them. So another idea to tell the SME that we will write down the precious information that we got from them in our content management system, like Confluence, for example, of course, with their permission, so that the knowledge is now shared and we or another person will not bother them again with the same question. It's a way of saying, if you answer my questions, you only answer it once. You're helping your team. That's kind of sneaky. I like that. It does help.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think it does.
You have to be a little careful sometimes, because I always think of information as something that's got an expiration date too, though. And then what happens if you record that in, say, Confluence? Who's responsible for maintaining that information? So that's just a scary little thing for me that I get concerned of. The more you can document, awesome, share it, tell the world, but make sure that folks, maybe at the top of Confluence, put a little disclaimer. This was last updated by ba-da-da. I spoke with this SME and this group, and just let people know, hey, this is, because information gets outdated pretty quickly.
It does, and you have to be aware of what the content flows are in your organization, and you have to know what your own data lifecycle looks like, or your content lifecycle, so that if you regularly expire information that is no longer valid or has reached the end of life in some way, you have to know that, because it's going to go away, right? Obviously, if you're working on it now, it's probably not near end of life, but that doesn't mean that everything isn't.
Yep.
What about the SME who's afraid to share thinking if they share that they are no longer needed? I'm not certain I understand.
So maybe if they share something with you, they lose their value?
I think that's where that's headed.
Maybe something like that?
Yeah, I think that's where that's headed, yeah.
I'm not sure. So they're worried about, if you take all of the information out of my head, then I have no value. The company will fire me and you're here to replace me. So maybe, so this is potentially, like one of those challenges we talked about. So it could be the SME kind of getting territorial about their information a little bit. And it's definitely tricky because it's not always obvious that it's happening. And usually when I find out that this is happening, it's happened and it's too late, right? Yeah. So they might get defensive as to why a non-expert's asking questions, back to the pulling teeth. What's the worst experience in their life? It's not always obvious. So I don't know. Again, going back to the valuing thing, and maybe instead of reassuring them, hey, we'll put this somewhere where it's always, you can thank them and say, thank you, we really appreciate this. Can I come back to you? Because you're always going to need to go back to folks. So if you can let them know that there's still going to be value, or, hey, would you review my document to make sure, I'm on the right track and I listened well. That could help.
I think the other side is that you're not making those hiring and firing decisions, or that you're not making longevity decisions. That doesn't, as a colleague, they're not making those decisions for you. No one's going to come to you and say, hey, did they give you everything they know? Because we're going to let go of them if they did. That doesn't happen.
And if it does, they know, and they've already made their decision on that front.
And I can actually appreciate people being worried about that, but I don't think it works laterally. I think it works hierarchically, up and down levels.
Sure, that makes sense.
Okay. Well, Kat, We're at the top of the hour, and we need to close out the show. So I'd like to thank Kat Reierson for making time to be on our show today, and thanks to you, our audience, for being here. Before you sign off, we would love it if you would let us know what you thought of today's show. Use the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel and give us a 1 through 5 star rating where 1 is low and 5 is high. Leave any comments you'd like about today's show. And also be on the lookout for an invitation to an upcoming episode of The Content Advantage. On our next episode on July 26th, when we will chat with Karen Bachman. She's a digital UX researcher at Regions Bank. We'll discuss different user testing strategies, approaches, and tactics, and we'll talk about the role usability testing plays in the development of successful content design efforts. So, Kat, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes, thank you. It was a lovely chat.
Okay. And thanks again for making time to watch this episode. Until we see you again, stay safe, be well, and keep doing great work. Okay. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great day. Kat, it's been